Good morning to you and welcome to the Vicarage here at Penn on this lovely Monday morning. Great to see you. Thank you for joining us. I hope you had a lovely weekend and great to see you this morning. This morning's reading is one of the most, what's been described as the most controversial text in the whole of the New Testament. So we're going to get straight into it this morning. The context is Jesus has just arrived in Jerusalem. And just to kind of so you can see what's going on, Jesus is basically living at Bethany. He's living there. About 2 miles outside Jerusalem. So you might see he becomes a commuter for a few days. He lives in Bethany and he commutes into Jerusalem each day. So let's get straight into it now. It's Luke, I beg your pardon, it's not. It's Mark's Gospel, Mark chapter 11. I'm starting to read at verse 12. On the following day, when they came from Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree and leaf, he went to see whether perhaps he'd find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. He said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." His disciples heard it. When they came to Jerusalem, and they entered the temple and began to drive out those who were selling and those who were buying in the temple, and he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves, and he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. He was teaching and saying, "Is it not written, 'My house shall be a house of prayer for all the nations'? But you have made it a den of robbers." And when the chief priests and the scribes heard it, they kept looking for a way to kill him, for they were afraid of him, because the whole crowd was spellbound by his teaching. And when evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city. In the morning, as they passed by, they saw the fig tree withered away to its roots. Then Peter remembered and said to him, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered." Jesus answered them, "Have faith in God. Truly I tell you, if you say to this mountain, 'Be taken up and thrown into the sea,' and if you do not doubt in your heart, but believe that what you say will come to pass, it will be done for you. So I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe you've received it, and it will be yours. And whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father in heaven may also forgive you your trespasses." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, there's a lot in here. I mean, there's many, many sermons in here. The reason this is so controversial, and if you read all the commentators, what they don't like about this reading is it's the only time Jesus does a destructive miracle. They seem to spend much of the time feeling sorry for the fig tree. But I have to say, I do think this kind of misses the point of what's really going on here. Think of it like this. You have Jesus going into Jerusalem and meeting a fig tree. Okay? Then you've got a story about the temple. Then you've got Jesus again the following morning going to Jerusalem and having an encounter with the fig tree. So what you've got here is fig tree, temple, fig tree. I think what you're meant to see is there's what he calls a sandwich going on there. You've got the temple bit in the middle. You've got the fig tree on both sides. I think what you're supposed to see is one great big unit. So it all kind of holds together. And to have that in mind, it does make a great deal more sense. So what's the message here? Which really about faith and about blessing. Many, many hundreds of years before, when Abraham had been given the covenant from God, he said, "You're going to be blessed so that through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed." In other words, he was blessed and God's people were going to be blessed so that everybody else could be blessed too. The trouble is, often they kept it to themselves. And rather than it being a blessing for everybody else, they kind of kept the blessing for themselves, or become very nationalistic and so on. And the blessing being something they kept for themselves. But it had always been the case. They were meant to pass it on to other people. And a classic example of that was in the temple. The temple was supposed to be a place where you could go and you could meet God. You could meet God, you could confess your sins, you could do it, you could pray to God. The temple was meant to be a place where everybody could meet God. Now, the only place in the temple where non-Jewish people could go was a place called the Court of the Gentiles. Now, it was a big area, but the problem was they'd filled it with so much market. There's this great big sacrifice industry was going on, there's many hundreds of animals each day and so on, that there was no room for Gentiles to get in. So a place that was meant to be a place where you could meet God, where you could confess your sins and meet God and ask God's guidance and so on, had been basically become a market. And that's what Jesus was saying when he went in, he was angry and he said, it was meant to be a house of prayer for all the nations, but you've made it into a den of thieves. And that's why Jesus was angry. It's not a sign of Jesus we see very often. See Jesus actually getting really angry here. He's angry because it was meant to be a place where everyone could meet God, but instead it had been a place where most people just couldn't get in at all. And that's why Jesus got righteously angry in the temple. And that's why he said what he did. That's why he trashed the place and overturned the money changers and that type of stuff. Because it was meant to be a place where everyone could be blessed. And with that in mind, I think that's what this whole business with the fig tree is about too. A fig tree is meant to be a sign of blessing, If it's meant to be a sign of fruitfulness, it's meant to be a sign of blessing. And in the same way that Jesus comes into town one morning and he's hungry and he sees this tree that should have some fruit on it, although it wasn't the season, actually there were little figs that would grow at the time that you could eat that were edible. He needs something, he's hungry, and yet this fig tree looks so impressive, promises so much, but doesn't deliver. Okay, that's why he curses it. In the same way, the temple should be a place where you could meet God, but actually when he came to it, it doesn't deliver because it's so full of market. And I think that's the point he's trying to make. And so he says to the fig tree, may you never bear fruit again. And he curses the fig tree, making the point that it was meant to bear fruit, it's meant to be fruitful, it's meant to provide something, but it doesn't deliver. In the same way, the temple is meant to be a place where people could meet God, but actually in the end, because it's so full of market, it doesn't deliver either. And that's what I think he means by cursing the fig tree, to make the point that something which is meant to be fruitful actually is fruitless. It isn't delivering. It looks impressive. It looks religious. It looks promising, but actually it just plain doesn't deliver because it's not doing what it's supposed to do. And that's what he means. So what does it mean for us? Well, I think three things in particular. Firstly, Jesus cursed the fig tree, and the fig tree actually shriveled up. And actually, of course, a few years later, that's exactly what happened to the temple. In 70 AD, it was completely destroyed by the Romans. But of course, inevitably, what happened, the really important thing is, in Jesus cross and Jesus' resurrection, he becomes the place where we meet God. We don't need temples anymore. It's good to meet together in places of worship, but actually we don't need them anymore. In Jesus is the place where we meet God today. We don't need temples made of bricks anymore. We need Jesus. He is the place through whom we meet God. So we don't need them anymore. And I think that's what he's saying is by destroying that, but by making this point about the temple, he's saying that temple made in bricks was replaced by the new temple, which is him. He is the place through whom we meet God. He is Jacob's ladder. He is the place. It's through him that we meet God. That's the first thing. Secondly, I think there's a solemn warning for us, really, about the blessing that we have received. It was meant to be a blessing, to be passed on so that through the God's people, all families of the earth will be blessed. And it's really important actually as Christians that we make sure that we are a blessing to everybody else. That Christianity and our faith should never become for us a holy huddle. It shouldn't be a place where we just keep, we get our personal blessing and blow everybody else. We should be a blessing to the community around us. The people of Penn should be glad that St. Bart's Penn is in it, because we should be a blessing to the community. And we should be a blessing to the people around us. We should bear fruit. We should be fruitful in our lives. As indeed the temple should have been, as indeed that tree should have been. We should be fruitful and we should be a blessing to the people around us. That's the second thing. But thirdly, at the end, Jesus says something very important about prayer, because he curses the fig tree, and lo and behold, when they go back the following day, the fig tree is gone. He says, whatever you ask in prayer, ask, and it will happen. And he talks about, if you have faith, then you could say to a hill, go, and into the mid-sea, throw it, and it will cast into the middle of the sea. Now, this is the illusion here, because he's talking here about something Herod the Great had done. Herod the Great, and you'd have been able to see this from the Mount of Olives, where the fig tree was. Herod the Great had actually moved some hills from one place to another to try and get something, to build something impressive he wanted to build. And Jesus is making the point here about prayer. If you believe, it will happen. And of course, you don't need to move hills, because he says in prayer, you can do even better things than what Herod's did. Herod just simply moved a hill. In Jesus, even great things are going to happen. You can throw it into the middle to see if you see what I mean. He's making a point that he can do something greater, and in him, through prayer, greater things can be done than even what Herod the Great did by moving hills a few months before, years before or whatever. So he's making the point about prayer, that through prayer, by believing and having faith, massive and wonderful things can happen and do happen. So that's this reading for this morning. It's a sandwich. and it's making some very important points here. Firstly is that now the temple wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. So Jesus is now the temple, and in him we can meet God today. And that in him we can know God well. Secondly, it makes the point about making the point that we need to be a blessing to the people around us. That through us, the families of the earth will be blessed. And we should be a blessing, not just to ourselves, but the people around us too. But thirdly, making the point that if we believe and have a trust and have faith, great things can happen, do happen, and will happen. Hope that makes sense.